This Bonfireside Chat Appendix episode is brought to you by our patrons at patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv. Ooh, badass with a motorcycle. Guns out for Bonfireside Chat. Yeah, you should go there and support us. If you don't, that's how we keep the lights on, and we're going to make new shows. We are close to making new shows. So head on over to patreon.com/DuckFeedTV. Thanks.
Some of our landings were desperate adventures. We are now prepared to meet the inevitable counterattacks with power and with confidence.
My name is Gary Butterfield.
My name is Kole Ross.
And you're listening to Bonfireside Chat. It is a Kindled appendix.
Oh no, it's on fire. And this week we are reading your responses to the second part of Irithyll, including Anne Orlando. Whoops. If you're listening to this, Anne Orlando is in this game, but we're past the spoiler wall, so you knew that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So we're reading those. You guys came out in force, which we love it when you do. So because of that, we're going to kind of get moving here. But before we have a little bit of follow up, Allison Baker, friend of the show, personal friend, says via contact, "Hey guys, I just wanted to write in to clarify the paintings found in the first part of Irithyll in the room with the first Silver Knight. On the podcast, you weren't able to identify all of them, so I did a little research, and it turns out they are all concept art images that can be found in the Design Works books for Dark Souls 1 and 2. From the left, they are Frozen Ilium Lois, the Duke's Archives, Nashandra in her human form, the Old Iron King's Throne, and Anne Orlando. Not sure if any plot significance can be attributed to these findings. Also of note, someone recently wrote in about the Wolnir fight taking place in a different area in the early trailers for the game, but weren't sure where it was. With some investigation, I was able to determine that it seems to be a slightly flooded and less adorned with treasure version of Yorm's boss area in the profaned capital. Again, I'm not sure if this has any lore significance."
Yeah.
The person who wrote, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say Allison isn't the first person who wrote in about the paintings, but that second one is actually a new piece of information.
The person who had wrote in before, they said that that Wolnir was actually in the Cathedral of the Deep.
Right.
And the reason they thought so is because of water on the ground. But I watched the video that Allison sent, and it actually is clearly Yorm's boss arena.
Yeah.
So
very cool.
Possibly interesting. I mean, like, Nito used to be in the Painted World. The Centipede Demon used to be on the roof of the church. Like, that could mean something. It could not.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, especially just like, fuck, if it was the cathedral, okay, maybe. But here, no, I'm just like, that doesn't seem to make any sense. So just a remix. Also, other people wrote in, some more forcefully than others. Here's a hint. Don't begin your feedback with, "for fuck's sake." Because upon closer inspection, yes, that painting in there is the same painting from Dark Souls 2, like the cursed one there on the wall. Maybe don't begin your feedback with "for fuck's sake." Thank you.
It's probably not worth getting that upset about it.
Yeah.
It is. I quote, Bob Mackey, friend of the show and friend of mine. Everybody who gets really mad about minor errors on podcasts should be forced to listen in real time while they look up everything on Wikipedia during recording.
Yeah.
It is something that, like, you do some I do some research for the show. There's a lot of stuff in these areas, and we got a lot of stuff we're doing. Like it is a busy podcasting life that we do, and people recognize that, and they come up and they say, like, "Hey, you guys put out a lot of stuff. How do you do it?" And we do our best. I like to think we do a good job. Every once in a while, something minor like that will fall through the cracks.
Yep.
It's part of why we have these appendix episodes.
Yep.
Is to correct ourselves and to be corrected. So don't be mad about it.
Yeah.
And also, it's not a big deal. And if you're trying to be jovial, recognize that joviality does not come through in text.
Right.
So if you start an email and it's literally like, "for fuck's sake," which I didn't get the message. So I don't know if it went on to, to say anything.
It was
like,
pretty.
Your parents are,
It was pretty much the whole way through, and just like that isn't one particular person. I mean, there was one particular person who did that. But that is a general thing that happens, and so like it's not that the thought hadn't occurred to us that it was Nashandra. In fact, we spent a lot of
exactly we talked about it being, and we're just like we're not entirely sure what that was us saying like. we have to go like do that research. And then people took that as if we were saying that's definitely not Nashandra.
Yeah, like we expressed doubt, like, hey, that doesn't like it. If it is Nashandra, what does that mean? Because that's fucking nonsensical. If
And
it's
that's
there,
part of it,
and that's
too.
why I
So-
was resistant to making that conclusion that it was.
Extend a little grace with the fact that we're trying to make sense of a game and want it to be a holistic whole.
Mhm.
You know, so it is easy to initially throw out information that doesn't make any fucking sense.
Mhm.
For fuck's sake.
Yeah.
But anyway, and this is not to say we don't appreciate corrections.
No,
Because we love them. Like
yeah,
it
we
is,
have a whole section of an episode of these episodes dedicated to errata. We
Yeah.
firmly believe, again, that thing about papers. A paper is only as good as its corrections column. We surface this. It's just, and not everybody who wrote in about this was a real dick, but the kinder ways are the ones that are going to surface.
and that doesn't mean you have to spend like a paragraph like SNRD.
No, please don't.
You could just
because that gets
like,
cut.
a real simple way would have been that painting is definitely in Nashandra. Here's a link, if you want to include a link, or even just saying that's definitely Nashandra. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't understand I don't think it's really worth getting frustrated by.
No, and also cue feedback about us being a little bit too particular about the feedback we get.
Whatever. What fucking ever. Anywho, do you want to let us know what Scott says?
Yeah. So Scott writes in, I alluded to this in the main episode, but I want to read the body of what Scott wrote. We have evidence of Aldrich's consumption of Gwyndolin having a measure of influence on him. So I find it plausible that he could have perpetuated part of the illusion part of the illusion of the Silver Knights. I then immediately went and disproved my own theory by verifying these Silver Knights leave flesh and blood corpses when killed instead of disappearing like the illusions. P.S. I have taken to calling the bridge beast a Yarnum possum.
Like Yarnum Possum.
Yep, Yarnum possum, pretty good.
When I didn't really bring this up in the episode because I didn't want to derail us.
Mhm.
Ascribing significance to whether something leaves a corpse or not is a real tricky thing.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that just that do or do not throughout the series.
Yeah.
And it's rarely significant. Like it happened to be significant with Dark and Orlando because we had illusions, that left. But when you kill a Taurus beast or a Taurus demon in the Demon Ruins in Dark Souls 1, they don't leave corpses.
Right.
They fade away. That's not an illusion. So it's like it doesn't necessarily mean much. The fact that they bleed, I think maybe is a little bit more, but that feels more of like a Bloodborne thing.
Yeah.
Like when there were different types of blood, this feels like this could go either way for me.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to, it was something that I personally didn't notice. So I wanted to make sure it was brought to light.
absolutely. Yeah. It's worth thinking about. It doesn't mean it's not worth thinking about. It's just that like whether something leaves a corpse does not always lead to a lore path.
Yeah. And then also whether or not that corpse ragdolls. Yeah.
Exactly. Which leads to a fun path.
Hmm.
Dalton says via contact, the Sullivan Beast are taken straight from the design of the Beast of Darkness from Berserk. There are many designs in Dark Souls 3 taken directly from the Berserk manga, but this is one that is by far the most uncanny resemblance.
Yeah. That is spooky. I mean, it's not spooky. It's not like, oh, what a coincidence. But like, yeah, it is.
What kind of insane watchmaker would make two of these things? It's been a while since I've read Berserk.
Yeah.
So I didn't recognize it right away, but I've looked at comparison images and it definitely is.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Definitely very cool. Man, I might actually buy a Warriors game. That Berserk Warriors looks pretty good.
Yeah. I think so too. And like, I played Hyrule Warriors thinking the same thing, like, oh, maybe I'll like this with a better skin, and didn't. Like, I think Hyrule Warriors is pretty boring, but Berserk might actually draw me back in even yet again.
Yep. They couldn't get you with Gundam, so they started moving on to different stuff.
Yeah.
It's getting smarter. It's learning.
It's a learning franchise.
Now, getting on to the actual responses about this area. John writes in, Anne Orlando was initially a giant bundle of glee for me. This is the moment that we've been waiting for since Hade's Tower of Flame first tricked us into thinking we were returning to the city of the gods. However, once it was all said and done, all I could say was, that's it? Maybe I'm just misremembering, but Anne Orlando felt significant in Dark Souls 1. In Dark Souls 3, it's basically just a staircase with a weird wing off to the right that goes nowhere, another staircase, and a big empty hall with some spiders and sludge. I can appreciate that this shows how far down this golden city has fallen, since the protagonist of Dark Souls 1 absolutely wrecked Gwyn's plans and possibly killed his son, who was maintaining the illusion. Aldrich's sticky putty self, taking up residence, possibly didn't help much either. But that's not the problem. I love the environment. I just wish that there was more to it. To me, this little taste just felt incomplete. like most of the Dark Souls 1 references in the game. Sure, we went back to Anor Londo. Sure, Aldrich was there devouring a god. And sure, it was great having a boss battle in our old stomping grounds. But it all could have been done with either more Anor Londo or none at all.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about how we were talking about for somebody who didn't know Dark Souls 1, but it would be true for anyone that this is just kind of a title screen and two rooms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not very big. I can see that, and it does just kind of end.
Yeah.
You know, so it doesn't have that kind of climactic. You know, when we run in Dark Souls or Anor Londo in Dark Souls 1, like the world opens up. It's a really big moment. There's a lot of game left. Here, it's just kind of that branch ends, and let's never speak of Aldrich again.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of a bummer. It's still, I mean, it worked for us for the reasons we kind of enumerated in the episode, but
yeah.
I think that did follow what you're saying follows.
Yeah, and just it's up to everybody their individual tolerances for how much, because like if I had to go through all of Anor Londo again, a lot of Anor Londo, especially once you get inside of the cathedral, is empty space.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of space between, a lot of bridges.
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. So Brian says via contact. I wouldn't feel bad about the point where you realized Irithyll was the base of Anor Londo. I didn't realize I was on the ground floor of the anal rodeo, until the very obvious ruined spiral stair machine. Nonetheless, I was excitedly texting my friends to see if they've gotten as far as I have, wanting to share in the shock and awe. I was exploring the Boreal Valley as the physical location of the painted world. But can you blame me? The snow, the Dalgate, the scary monster bridges all scream to me the painted world. Perhaps the painted world and Anor Londo are closer than we first thought. Maybe, based on the Gwendolyn's illusory magic, the painted world was a real section of the valley.
Yeah, but that also implies that Anor Londo is right next to the painted world all along.
Yeah,
and also that the painted world is a
like,
physical location.
Yeah, it's not. It's a prison. It's another dimension.
Yeah,
you know.
So it could be like a mist thing where you're connecting to like a far off place.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like it actually. Well, we talked about that with the Sable Church of Londor in the last episode, how that's not convergy worgy. But yeah, I have been generally skeptical of literal interpretations that tie the painted world to this, rather than just kind of like, oh, there are some similarities.
Yeah.
It could be kind of a wink, but without some additional text, like I'm not totally all in on it.
Yeah.
But the idea that Brian's talking about of that bait and switch, like he thought he was definitely in the painted world and then saw it was Anor Londo, is pretty, you know, I can sympathize to that, because it does have some kind of some of those similarities. If that's the first thing you see, that's going to kind of inform your perspective.
Yeah,
for sure.
Gwillem writes in, one of my favorite things about the Anor Londo reveal is how smoothly the game segues into it. It goes from reminding us of the place to showing us images of it, to giving us treasure from it, and ultimately putting us on its doorstep. Even the brilliant yet seemingly unrelated set piece that is the Aldrich's Faithful Stairway includes Anor Londo looming above, hiding in plain sight if we're able to pull our eyes away from the chaos. Man, people really didn't seem to notice just the tableau. Sorry, I'm editorializing. Yeah. I'm especially fascinated by the corrosive shit that's all over Anor Londo. The popular explanation is that it's Aldrich's filth, but I don't buy that. We've been to his own house, the very place where his goo transformation happened, and everything there was in generally great condition. Sure, there are traces of decay strewn around, but they're the exception rather than the rule. In Anor Londo, literally everything is decaying. There is no part of the building that's untainted. Maybe Aldrich is letting his hair down and treating the place as a hotel he can trash, but I prefer to read it as a commentary on the series. The rot has set in. That's not meant as negatively as it sounds. I'm a big fan of both sequels, and the entire Irithyll section felt utterly magical. But the Dark Souls sheen has undeniably worn off. What was once singular is now a franchise. That's a bell that can never be unrung. And what better way to illustrate this cheapening of an artistic vision than to have the first game's crowning spectacle appear in a degraded, defiled state?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly kind of like a death of the author kind of thing, too. Like that is a way that you can come to it and kind of interpret, you know, just the idea of, you know, the familiar and time passing and what has changed fundamentally about this familiar thing that you're kind of still tied to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it can also be both.
Yep.
Like the idea of this being Aldrich's filth and it also being a metaphor, you know, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, something. So something that is perfect and great and respected, and built by this architect and maintained out of love and out of doing this, and then all of a sudden, here's this other thing that comes into the same space and starts defiling it and wrecking it around. Perhaps as a metaphor for the team that made Dark Souls 2, walking into this world and shitting
sure.
on and disrespecting. Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then when you run into the two podcasters who have been shitting and disrespecting on the thing, and then, I can possibly. I think that is valid. I didn't really get that sense. I read a couple of like real metatextual treatments of Dark Souls 3 about Dark Souls 3 being about the series and about Dark Souls 1 as a game, which I think are all interesting to read. But like you said, death of the author, like I don't buy the intentionality that much.
Yeah.
Not that it necessarily matters. If you like it, that's great. It's a fun exercise, but I haven't read anything that I found very convincing.
Yeah. I would want the I would want the text to be a little bit more cohesive before like the meta part can be built on top of it. Would be my own personal instinct on that, because I'm all about the metatextual stuff. It's just it needs a basis.
Yeah. Eric says by contact, Dark Souls Anor Londo is a very different place from what's represented in Dark Souls 3. For starters, Dark Souls Anor Londo is built onto a large cliff. Contrastingly, Dark Souls 3 Anor Londo is surrounded by fairly low terrain. The bulk of Dark Souls Anor Londo is entirely missing, and no rubble exists to indicate that it had once been there. Additionally, the height of Dark Souls Anor Londo was presented as being much more extreme. I know that this last point can be chalked up to design limitations in the original game, but Dark Souls 3 Anor Londo doesn't come off as very tall in contrast. Together, this made it much harder to place myself in Anor Londo from Irithyll than it might have otherwise been. For all the existing clues, there were some very extreme conflicts between my mental image of Anor Londo and what we see in the general Irithyll area. What do you think is the cause? Is it the passage of aeons? The land converging towards Lothric Castle? Or is it just From's development team didn't make geographical cohesiveness a priority?
I think that it is the convergence with kind of as an unintended but very convenient result of the final one there, about the cohesiveness not really being a priority.
Yep. Me too. It definitely does not feel like the passage of time actually moving mountains and stuff. Like that's a thing that can happen, but is so hard to illustrate.
Yeah.
The convergingness is such a like convenient narrative thing to just kind of like make anything work.
Yeah.
And that sounds dismissive. I'm kind of glad they're not worried about it. I don't want, I wouldn't be necessarily happy with a game where like it just like you mapped Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 and then we're sad that it meant something that they didn't match up entirely.
Yeah.
That's on a different engine. It's on a different platform. Like it would be kind of bonkers if it did. Yeah. So I think it wasn't really a priority. Maybe shouldn't have been, and Convergy Wergy is a nice little excuse for all of it.
And also, just you take this thing that was a walled city at the top of the world and, it says something about Lothric that, now, you look up from this thing that used to be at the top and now you see Lothric towering over it with its own kind of grand archive. Looking down as well, like it says something, like quite literally about the rise of new kingdoms and the fall of others. This convergence has, put this other city on top of what used to be the top.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it has a good effect, and it doesn't really bother me too much. It doesn't bother me as much as the weather changing so profoundly. But
it's weathery, beathery. Like it's,
Yeah. Let's see here. Philip writes in, the dual Sullivan beasts in the Aldrich Faithful bonfire area were definitely the toughest encounter for me. In desperation, after wasting several embers just to get invaded almost immediately after leaving the Pontiff bonfire, I came up with a different tactic for summoning help. I had noticed that the red and purple summon signs sometimes appear even without embering. I summoned one of the purple phantoms, waved at the invader, and immediately took off down the ladder to the Hellspot. My success rate was about 20% in getting the purple phantom to help out with the PvE. Clearly, most purples were expecting a fight club, and they were reluctant to help me with the toughest non-boss encounter in the game. I was so grateful when a purple seemed to get the picture and try to help out. I finally killed one of the beasts, and I let the second beast kill me to give the purple phantom whatever tongue, ear, or scalp that they get for killing a host. I wouldn't know I don't PvP. Fighting the last beast alone after getting my bloodstain, thank Gwyn they don't respawn, was much easier. On subsequent playthroughs, I would come back when over-leveled and had much more success with the pair, although it's never been as easy as Lobos or other streamers can make it seem. I've tried putting down my purple sign to help other players who don't want to Ember, but it doesn't seem to catch on. Do you think that using the purple signs for PvE co-op and non-boss areas was intended? I wish it would catch on.
Yeah, I think that boy, intended's hard to say. I've had other people talk about getting purple phantoms to help them out, and I've done a little bit of mild helping with purple phantoming. Generally, I'm just a huge dick, but like I've done a little bit of it. So that's pretty neat. I think it's possible,
yeah,
to do so, but it's really hard to summon here because of that Fight Club zone.
Yeah,
for anything. So doing anything, it's like a area dedicated to it, and the Aldrich Faithful is placed there, I think, because the game wants you to go through this alone. Or at the very least, like challenged to your utmost. Like this is supposed to be a difficulty spike.
Yeah.
So it kind of, the level design runs contrary to that.
Yeah.
Of it being being able to use purple signs or any signs at all, really, for PvE here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they intentionally built a wild card, and a wild card obviously can, help as much as it can hurt.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
even though
cards,
they mostly hurt.
Well, yeah. And in cards, wild cards are always helpful. That was that kind of breakdown. I'm talking like wild card in a Charlie Kelly kind of sense, but like they knew that was going to happen, and I think that it is a nice, happy, chaotic accident whenever it does.
Yeah, I also wish it would happen more.
Yeah.
Jacob says by contact. Once I confirmed that the Silver Knights bled and were actual people, it also gave me the idea that perhaps these knights are puppets, much in the same way that Gwendolyn is. From exploring Anor Londo in Dark Souls 1, we know that the Silver Knight armor is not terribly hard to come by, and there's already a great deal of precedent for the idea of animate suits of armor in the series. It may not amount to much, but I do like the idea of maintaining a facade of holiness and power to lend credence to Pontiff Sullivan's / Aldrich's rule. The same way this is expressed with the outwardly beautiful Grand Cathedral decaying and infested with black sludge. I like to think that the Silver Knights are that same sludge animating these suits of armor, just for PR.
Yeah. I mean, it's a possibility. I mean, religions do that all the time. Appropriate something from what came before to lend legitimacy to it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I do just wish it was like there was text about why there are knights now.
Yeah.
And actually, you know what, I say that, and that's giving it too much credit. I wish there wasn't explicitly text that denied it. Like there's text that explicitly implies continuity. Like the knights are still here. They still guard the old gods. Like they weren't a thing, so don't, it's not like it's actively stopping headcanon, and it's like Richard said in the last episode, like item descriptions are the closest thing we have to a omniscient voice in the game. Like if we have to start doubting those,
Yeah, and there are times where there's dramatic irony where the omniscient voice we know is wrong.
But it always says
cute.
It never just says a statement. It says like some believe, or like the tales tell, or this was believed to be, things like that. Like it usually will give it that kind of sense of doubt. There. So it's frustrating to me that like the Silver Knights are kind of still a sticking point.
Yeah,
me here.
Randy writes in. In the latter half of Irithyll, the part that really stood out to me was my wedding to Henri. Throughout the entirety of my noble quest to become the supreme ashy hot dog queen of the Hollows, Yuria and her colleagues had been all elbows and winks with their allusions to marriage and preparing my spouse, tying a rock to subtlety and throwing it into a lake. I knew to which dark end this grim train trundled. Up until this point, I hadn't really cared. As you well know, the side quests in Dark Souls 3 and the characters that fail to be propped up by them aren't the most engaging or robust. I was totally ready to eat this dude and get deader. However, making my way down the stairs, down to the Hall of the Dark Moon Tomb, I found myself unexpectedly struck by the scene as presented. This quiet, somber tableau with poor Henri's corpse laid out, his face covered, had a sort of sad beauty to it. I made my way to the altar and was faced with a prompt. I found myself hesitating. I'll be the first to admit that I've grown more sentimental as my years crowd behind me, but to my surprise, my first emotional response to this was that of guilt. This nice boy didn't deserve this, compelled to scratch out a message expressing such. You don't deserve this, but Hollow required a head. I felt absolved enough in my own heart to proceed. Affording myself the freedom to indulge these small, self-made fancies when they surface has made me a happier person, I feel. I'm not sure why this moment had such a strong effect on me, though. I suspect that it might be a potent example of that aesthetic of dignity that Miyazaki is often quoted about. This scene, which heretofore had been alluded to fairly blithely, somehow knew when it was time to shut the fuck up and let something just be. A rare tack that I think we all wish Dark Souls 3 adhered to a little bit more closely. Regardless, aesthetics can clearly go a long way in hammering ardor into our hearts. A hammer that From Software, some may argue, swings with a heft unearned. With a heavy sigh and a glistening eye, I am compelled to disagree. Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
Yep. It's an affecting thing, especially because, there's I have a place in my heart for all of these Solaire types, the constant companions, the ones who seem, really solid. I think that, especially like Lucatiel carries a lot more pathos, of all of them, at least to me personally. And having this lovingly authored of a bad end for this character, definitely it feels like the intention is to fuck with you.
It is it's something that I think a lot about in Dark Souls 3 NPCs, and something that I think that they do really well, and why I think that they earn a lot of goodwill that is like sometimes maybe unearned, is this presentation. Because the presentation game has never been better. Like the voice acting is really, really excellent, in these things. So like Henri, there's not very much to Henri as a character. Like the part of this that worked for me is this culmination of this thing with Henri. The idea of her being an orphan and hunting down Aldrich and stuff is fine and pretty cool, but she doesn't say that much that's like interesting. There's not that much text that like, actually talks about her. But her as a pawn for a delivery device for this kind of scene, and this tableau is really, really effective for me as well. So it wasn't so much like I have some affection for Henri, like I like Henri, but this is the best thing Henri could have done.
Right.
Is die for this scene. Like this is way more satisfying than the ending where she beats Aldrich. Like
sure.
that, I have to bring my own, satisfaction to it. This is actually like exactly like Randy says, like this is just a quiet moment of like intense kind of sacrifice.
Yeah.
And stuff that I really love. So, Jan says via contact. The inclusion of the luck stat always seemed unceremonious and weirdly unnecessary, but I think there's a little bit more to it than meets the eye. Specifically, the fact that it's functionally almost identical to the humanity stat in Dark Souls 1. Both increase item discovery and curse resistance and are called the essence of human beings. As such, luck and humanity in Dark Souls seem closely related, perhaps even interchangeable terms. Unfortunately, there's extremely little in-game that refers to luck at all. The Hollow Gem, which allows for infusing of weapons with luck scaling, mentions that hollow weapons are said to peer into the essence of its wielder, whose luck boosts attack. Henri's straight sword is more informative, calling luck an elusive, essential property unique to humans. If luck equals humanity, perhaps that has something to do with why Yuria chose Henri, in particular, to be the player character's spouse. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I think the game mechanics make a strong case for luck and humanity being the same concept, but if you have any counter-arguments, I'd be interested in hearing them. The show is great. Thank you for hosting it. I hope you noticed that human dregs look a lot like collapsed humanity sprites.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. They're definitely related, if they're not exactly the same thing. Like that connection's pretty explicit. That luck and humanity, and the fact that is Henri's kind of thing, and that matches her character really well.
Yeah.
Which again, like as I just mentioned last entry, is like not super complicated, but is this kind of like plucky, hapless kind of like getting this kind of revenge, her against the world kind of thing.
Yeah.
The way humanity has kind of been positioned in this game, kind of historically, or the series rather.
Yeah. I think it's pretty satisfying because, humanity has never been as prominent in the series as it was in 1. Like it is kind of, as a concept, these this thing that you kind of acquire and ultimately like manifests as these sprites and things, becoming less prominent or kind of like shifting to different things. I like the idea that in this kind of, almost entirely faded out world where entropy is setting in, even that essential force has become something, again, like elusive and essential is a wonderful way that the game describes it. And it becomes something just like a little bit more like desperate. If you're relying on luck, then all of a sudden like that's like a little bit of a darker thing than relying on this thing that is, ultimately like a aspirational and an inherent positive. like humanity, with a capital H is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't help but think if this was always the idea to make this, to kind of add that value to it, like that elusiveness, and then, elusiveness, yes. Essential, no. Like, they don't think they made it mechanically, it didn't quite do as much as, like, even humanity in the first one. Like, if they could have tied those two concepts together a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because luck builds suck now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's a way to do it, and they're fine for PvP. They really suck for PvE.
Yeah.
It doesn't. So it's kind of weird because this kind of response, like 2 months ago, I've been like, you know what, the game is doing a great job of doing that, because I'm doing this luck build with a sword, and I feel really powerful through upgrading this thing that's like part of your soul. It's not like you can't exercise your luck. I'm upgrading something inherent to myself, and it's actually making a difference in the world, and I'm more effective. Now I'm not.
I read that description not so much like essential as mandatory or required, but essential as in of the essence of something.
Oh, of the essence.
Yes.
Yeah. It is even then, though, like, with the idea of it being like, it is supposed to be something special, and it's not mechanically special.
Right.
Like, item find and curse resistance are not useful, really. Like, item find is fine.
Yeah.
Especially if you're grinding shit out, but like, it's not, even if it's not essential, like, needed, it's also not a good use of, like, taking the narrative and crossing it with the play.
Yeah.
Making me feel like I need it, or I feel good about having it.
And I think at that point, it comes down to whether or not you think it needs to, its value needs to be reflected in the mechanic. As opposed to being just kind of like a narrative way of saying this is what that idea ultimately became.
Need is a strong word. It would undeniably be stronger if it was reflected in the mechanic. Like, if you can tie things, if it's a game and you can tie things in the mechanic and narrative, you should. There's not an example where you shouldn't do that.
Right.
Like, there are no games where that shouldn't be done. So it would have been cooler. It is cool on its own. Like, it's resonant. I like it. But it almost was a little bit better.
Yeah. It's better adjacent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Better adjacent. It's an A- kind of expression of an idea as opposed to an A+.
Yeah.
Boaz or Boaz says via contact. Eldrick gave me the feeling that he's a boss fight intended to be fought as a pair because of how he can be deadly at a ton of different ranges, particularly his second phase rain of arrows and magic attacks. It feels like you're almost supposed to bring someone else along, so that one of you can run around dodging arrows while the other gets in a couple hits. Just like in the original Anor Londo, I split my time between boss runs and helping people new to the area by backstabbing Silver Knights, pointing the way, and gesturing frantically at the lever that opens the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I fail to see how co-op would be necessary to make him easier or better, just because so many of his attacks are just like explicit area denial kind of things. Like, I almost see, man, like, co-op didn't really help out with Quilog.
Yeah.
And it's a very similar idea.
I think the idea just being that, like, literally he doesn't do anything while arrows are raining, so you can just get in some hits then. But the tricky part is that if bringing in co-op is that arrow attack is more or less doom.
Right.
So if you get hit by it, you can end up wasting a lot of somebody else's time as well by going through. Even though I did co-op it a lot, it's just because I'm good at dodging the arrows.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting idea, and it could be a kind of a neat, like, Orange Sand Smo kind of callback, as that is explicitly a boss designed for two people.
Or inversion, an Orange Sand Smo inversion, where you have this one guy who is focused on running away and doing damage where it's opportune, and you have two people kind of focused on pincerring him into a place where they can't help but take damage.
Yeah.
Chris writes in, although I love Dark Souls, I'm not a lore hound. I don't get very invested in the character stories or the specifics of the world's history, preferring to just let the atmosphere wash over me. That said, Aldrich is one of my favorite characters in the series, and that's largely thanks to how unusually straightforward the storytelling is for a Souls game. The thrill of seeing Anor Londo Castle and that title card at the top of that elevator, all looking exactly as you remember it, is quickly replaced with disgust at the state of the interior. This place has been defiled. After Aldrich's epithet, the Devourer of Gods, is revealed, it only takes a few moments to piece together the rest of the story. He uses Gwendolyn's bow and magic attacks. His boss music quotes Gwendolyn's theme, and he is wearing Gwendolyn's torso like a party hat. So Aldrich moved into my favorite part of Lordran, ate one of the original Dark Souls bosses, and shit him out all over the floor. There are certainly nuances to discover through a closer reading of the item descriptions, but I don't really need any. I love this guy, and it certainly doesn't hurt that he's one of the most fun bosses, both for co-oping and soloing.
Yeah. Like we said, it is a real brutal elemental force of power, or a show of force rather.
Yeah.
Force of power. That's not an expression. Show of force.
Yeah. Sounds like the force of power sounds like the title of a Yu-Gi-Oh episode.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah. A particularly brutal and elemental Yu-Gi-Oh episode. Yeah, it is really easy to understand somebody coming through and eating something more powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens all the time. Like even back to, Demon Souls, when you chase the fat official through 1-3, and then the penetrator kills him.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like this is this thing that's been giving me so much trouble. And what's this thing that's even bigger than it? Well, it dies in 6 hits, but it looks really, really intimidating. Yep. It dies in 6 hits, and you can have what's his butt solo him, no problem. Mustache man. Yeah, and finally, just funning, Regavan says, how different would the game be if what we think of as the most difficult bosses didn't have the expanded health bars at the bottom of the screen? Like, what if Ornstein and Smo / Artorias / Nameless King, etc. had only the regular enemy health bars above their head? Like, if a person who finished regular Dark Souls got their memory wiped and then replayed this version, would they still feel as overwhelmed?
I think they would feel more overwhelmed.
If they just had a regular health bar?
Yeah, first off, having that health bar omnipresent on the screen, so you can always kind of, you don't have to like camera search for it. Also, whenever there's like a mini boss who has a tremendous amount of HP and it's just this tiny little bar that hovers over their head, each attack that you do only takes away a small sliver of that, as opposed to, just kind of one of these larger ones where each attack kind of like takes off more real estate on the screen. It's easier to like gauge your progress, I think, when you have this one, this health bar that is as wide as the screen. I think it's about proportion as opposed to like the absolute length.
Yeah. Yeah, it would depend also when you ran into them, though. The only way I could see it not working that way is if you went to a boss kind of right away, and then you saw that he took like, oh, this is like a regular enemy, and he's this tough.
Yeah.
Then you expect that from everyone. But I'm really glad they signal it differently.
Yeah.
Because it's good. Signaling is good. Anticipation is good.
Yep. I also like seeing the name.
Yeah. It is pretty much everything about how bosses are presented in Dark Souls is good.
Yeah.
And in terms of video games in general. Like you have this sense of like knowing what you're in for and everything. Yeah. So taking anything away from that, I think would be a detriment.
Yep.
So thanks everybody for writing in. If you have anything to say about Smoldering Lake or Demon Ruins 2, now in chalice form, hit us up at duckfeed.tv /contact.
Yeah. And if you want to support the network financially, which is a real way to help us do more of these things, go to patreon.com/duckfeed.tv.
Yep. Ratings and reviews are helpful. Spreading the word on social media. Big thanks again to Richard Pilbeam for joining us last episode. You should find his Jerks Sans Frontiers YouTube series. It'll be in the show notes for the last episode. But you should definitely check that out. And we really appreciate him.
Yeah.
I don't think that we have deleted scenes.
Consider them a bonus.
Yeah, if they exist, they are a bonus. If not, Umbasa, and we will see you next week.
Yep.
And we all pray that we will have far more soon